So, Pinaki, do you ever find yourself working even though you're really sick?
That's a really good question. Actually, that used to happen a lot in my younger career. And now, and actually for a long time, I have taken the stance of, hey, if I'm not feeling well, I'm just going to take the day off because I could recover much faster and I could get back to what I need to do much faster. And hell, I could use a day off usually at that point, right? Because before I used to like trudge through it, but then what I found happening is like whatever ailment I'm facing, it just gets elongated and my days just turn miserable.
I think you and I have both worked with lots of people who are self-professed workaholics. And one thing that I find really interesting is it seems to be a point of pride for a lot of them. And I've seen some people, they compromise or sacrifice their physical health, their mental well-being, relationships, their ability to be present for their children. And, you know, they sacrifice so much just for the sake of work. And I always find it kind of a funny thing. I had a late friend of mine, actually, he left his job just before.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And he left his job before the pandemic, in large part because of the commute. And he had to traverse 3 major highways during rush hour in Toronto, which is never fun to get to and from his office. And it was stressful. And this was well before the pandemic. And this was at a time when, before working remotely was really a thing or a viable option for a lot of people. But I remember him asking me, Chris, why does it feel so wrong to leave this job because of the commute? It feels like it's a trivial reason. I like this company. I like the job. I like the people I work with. And I knew him well, Pinaki. And I also knew what was most important to him. So I asked him, what's it all really for? What are you working for? And if you get home after an hour or an hour and a half of fighting rush hour traffic and you're exhausted and stressed and kind of miserable, is this really worth it? Like, if you can't be the best version of yourself for the people that you really love at home, your amazing wife, your beautiful kids, is it really worth it? And eventually he did make the decision to leave that role, and he had no regrets. So today's episode I'm excited about. It's really examining this question: why does it feel so wrong to put yourself before your company?
That's so true. And it's such a awesome topic, really, because it really gets into like the idea of self-care and mental health, right? And I think we have to consciously make the decision to do so, because I think most businesses and organizations, I think are bred not to. We could talk about that a little bit later. Like for instance, you mentioned the story about your friend, and right before the pandemic, I know for me, as a CEO in this company, as the pandemic came and hit, right, I found myself like facing a lot of decisions as like, how do I do this? What do I tell people? And how do I make decisions? And I found what helped me was to make a bigger decision, one that will help guide me in all the smaller decisions. And I kind of flat out said to myself that, what I'm going to do and what I will decide to do is just that put the health of our people first. That was more important to me. That was more important than revenue. It was more important than reputation. It was more important than the company. So because if like one person's like health like suffered because of this business or a decision that I make, I didn't like that idea one bit. And I'd basically not rather do this than to compromise someone's health in all different ways. So I think like what you're talking about, or what we're talking about today, is a conscious decision that we have to make that'll like overarchingly like help us make decisions in the future. Just like the sickness question you asked earlier on, or the commute, because I think, a long and arduous commute could slowly drive us to insanity. Some people have to do it based on their location or whatnot, but it's like, how do we care for ourselves even when we have situations like that? With that in mind, welcome everyone to Why Does It Feel So Wrong? With over 20 years in the world of work, Chris and I are talking about things that we have observed all this time that are ripe for evolution, right? We don't necessarily have like the right answers, but we're comfortable in what we're asking. Is this something that we should be doing in 2023, right? Because work shouldn't suck. It should feel awesome. It should feel great. This might be a naive way of us to be thinking, but I think that's what gets us into the future of workplaces and where we need to go as a humanity. So yeah, let's dive into it, right? Why does it feel so wrong to put yourself before the company, right? To realize that self-care is company care.
For sure. And I think it goes back to questioning, is your workplace actually potentially killing you? I know that, in the last 10 years, the World Health Organization has looked at workplace burnout as a serious condition that we can't ignore any longer. And I think workplaces, despite the investments that they make in well-being programs, mental health programming, a lot of times organizations can be quite toxic and can be quite a challenging place for people to stay healthy and take care of themselves.
There's so much behind that and in the history of that, right? It's like, especially when like organizations have like a notable brand that everybody wants to work with, right? Because it's really difficult for someone to like even stand up and change the atmosphere, because the response could be like, hey, I have a line of people that are ready to do this and take on this type of work, right? So it's so interesting on how like brands and organizations could use that reputation to their advantage to like pull the most out of people. Fun few stories, right, that are related to this, and I'll kind of like, I could dip into the history a little bit behind it, but a few, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, I'm working with a startup, and I'm working with the owner of the startup, and they asked me to interview would-be CTO candidates. And there's one gentleman I'm interviewing, comes from really well-known companies, and interview went great. And at the end, I was like, so yeah, what do you think about the owner, CEO of the company? Do you think you could work with them? And they were like, I think I look for like 3 things in a CEO when I'm working with a company. I don't remember what the 2 things were, but one of the things that he mentioned was need a real charismatic CEO that could motivate a team. And I kind of think about this in the terms of like tech companies and what they offer and whatnot. And it's like, I kind of like read beyond the lines a little bit, and I'm like, I get it. You need someone to be able to motivate people to work extra hours for less than normal pay in order to get equity and other things like that. So we're kind of like using charisma, motivation, leaders as a way to quote unquote motivate or push people to just go beyond and continue pushing beyond. And that works, and it's somewhat necessary, unfortunately, for the tech environment and the tech industry. At the same time, it has ramifications from like mental health and other things that are coming into place. Does that make sense? Do you react to that one?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's almost a way of weaponizing charisma for the betterment of organizational success. And I think it's not meant to be intentional, but it is meant to try to inspire people to go above and beyond. And I like the idea that when people really do have the desire to work above and beyond, and they get joy and pride and satisfaction from it, I think there's nothing really terribly wrong with it until it gets to a point where it starts to impact their ability to do the things that we talk about, Pinaki, which is be present for your personal relationships and for your kids at home, and to do things that also can give you joy outside of the workplace. So I think that part is challenging because it's hard for organizations to recognize it, because people seem really happy and they're really absorbed and invested in the work that they're doing. But also the people themselves, I think it's really hard for them to be able to see that it's fracturing their own personal lives outside of the office, even though they do enjoy what they're doing. And so that was a tough one, because I think it is something that is much more difficult to detect, and it's harder to address, simply because neither the organization nor the employee are actually aware of how it might be negatively impacting their own lives.
And it gets compounded and multiplied if there's some kind of mental health issue that starts to like form or has formed on top of that or around that, right? And I did take a look into like the history behind mental health and mental stigmas, throughout the years. And, when we develop certain issues and certain conditions, how do we kind of work within the workplace with that, right? And people have long been afraid or fearful of mental issues, right? Like back in ancient times, right? In Greece and whatnot, they were labeled as deviants and criminals, right? And some of those stigmas, that start from mental health even persist today, right? And when you kind of like look at where all of the, say, employee health and advocacy work comes from within organizations, it really did start around like the 1950s, right? Post-wars, people actually wrote books on etiquette in the workplace. There was a lot of promotion of peace and prosperity, but that's when employee assistance program came to being in around the 50s, as like veterans were returning from the war in World War II, and they struggled to figure out how to get back in. And then in the 1960s, wellness kind of took this, clamped onto productivity. And so we're like, how do we make people more productive while still promoting wellness? And then this is where like that Mad Men era came out, where everyone was smoking in the office. The quote unquote 3 martini lunches were in effect and things like that. How do we make people more productive while having more fun? In the 70s, public health became a big component of this, where we realized that cigarette smoking is actually bad for your health. And so that became a known public health issue, right? In 1979, Johnson & Johnson created Live for Life, an on-site wellness program, right? So that included physical assessments, questionnaires, information on stress management, nutrition, weight control. But there was still like a big stigma on the mental health aspect of it, right? Where Aaron Goffman, Canadian-born American sociologist and psychologist, writer, considered by some as quote unquote the most influential American sociologist in the 20th century, he went on to quote and say, "There is no country, society, or culture where people with mental illnesses have the same societal value as people without mental illnesses," which is like, damn, you said that out loud today. It's like you wouldn't even dare to even like think about it in that time. But in the 80s, we began to implement more stress-related mental health programs in the workplace. Workplace balance came into existence in the 80s, in this decade. Exercise became big, and like Jane Fonda released an exercise video that became really popular. So companies started like health risk assessments and on-site fitness classes. In the 90s, we began going into culture and awareness, more lobbying for work-life balance. It became more important to define culture and have people understand it, and that's where things like Casual Fridays came about, right, in the 90s. Programs that focused on awareness and lifestyle changes for people. In the 2000s, we had some more innovation stuff, right? By this point, about 70% of U.S. companies had a workplace wellness program. The big tech revolution also happened, like companies like Google, Twitter, YouTube, Apple, all competing for talent, started to make another rise in that fun culture, right? And that's the time when like ping pong tables became cool in the office place. We had slides and sleep pods in the office space. In the 2010s, there was no real change. In the 2020s, the coronavirus pandemic happened. And that took a lot of change, right? It took the world to new levels to really understand mental health challenges. People were suffering from isolation, instability, stress, too much work, burnout. All of those things became like really in the forefront. And so now for most modern progressive companies, mental wellness programs is like now becoming more of a total package, where we're talking about your mental health, physical health, integrative care, clinical and non-clinical stuff. So, right, there's more thought to it than before. And in fact, things like health coaching and work and leadership consultants, that's like a $7 billion industry right now with about 128,000 coaches that are in the world right now. So it's been fascinating to see like how companies have been reacting and treating people and their care for themselves from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the COVID pandemic, and it's a very visible pandemic. You can see people coughing or they're sniffling, and there's clear symptoms. Whereas with mental health, it's a lot harder to see the issue. It's kind of rotting underneath the floorboard. So on the surface, I think most people show up and they try to show up in a way that betrays how they're really feeling. They want to show up to work as though everything's going great, when in fact they might be really struggling. And I know that during the pandemic, it really came to the surface. I know there was research from SHRM where they take a look at the psychological costs of COVID, and millions were finding themselves unemployed. What SHRM was looking at was that 41% of employees in the U.S. felt burnt out from work, and then another 23% reported feeling depressed at some point. So if you add those two up, even if there is some overlap, you're still looking at anywhere from half to almost 2/3 of your employees either feeling depressed or burnt out. And I remember reading an article in the New York Times earlier in the pandemic, and they described a period or a state of languishing, which actually really spoke to me. Because I felt this as well myself. It wasn't burnout. We still had energy, and it wasn't depression either. It's not that we felt hopeless, but you just felt a little bit more joyless or aimless. And the way that the New York Times described it was languishing is almost a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It almost feels like you're muddling through your days, looking through life through like a foggy windshield. And it was something really interesting to capitalize it in this way. I mean, we also call it quiet quitting, where people are still there, but it's you're just kind of going through the motions. You're not really as absorbed or, to your point earlier, as inspired by the work that you're doing. You don't feel as connected to your mission or your purpose. And I think that's something that can be really, really rough on people.
Definitely, right? And it's so true, right? Like the things that we're going through are so beneath the surface, and not everyone could relate or understand, right? Like I love the analogy that like coronavirus that have physical symptoms. We hear coughs and things like that, but we could all relate because I guess one way or another, we've all experienced it. So we know what it feels like. And that means someone else who has it right now or is going through it, we can empathize with them. But then we have other folks that like, we don't know what it's like to be like, have major depressive disorder or have, levels of bipolar or schizophrenia and other folks like that, or autism, things that we don't know what's beyond the surface, especially if we can't see it, right? As high-functioning individuals who would be in the workplace. And I know, we talk about like the stresses of work, but then there's the stresses of not work or like what's happening in our home life that then compounds the issue. And then there's all these stigmas behind it, right? So how it shows up in the workplace today are these like slew of like different like stigmas, right? Like the one clear one is, the quote that I just said a little while ago, where like, people with mental health issues are just not as competent or they are weaker than folks without. I don't completely agree with that at all. And then because of that, there's this like self-stigma, right? Like if I am diagnosed or have a mental illness or condition, then I am weaker than most people, right? That's now taking what people outside say and internalizing it. Then society, if like has this courtesy stigma, right? Where like we're now empathizing or shaming family members and other folks because like, why is this happening? And then there's the ever famous like danger of stigma, right? Where, people who have this condition are dangerous and I just don't feel comfortable hanging around with them and stuff. Those are all things that like, that I suppose kind of baggage that we could bring into our workplace. And then what you said earlier about like burnout and in the workplace. That's a real thing. And a really recent research by Microsoft, they were looking at the usage of their tools in most workplaces. And they said that we spend an average of 8.8 hours a week reading and writing emails and 7.5 hours a week logging meetings, right? And so, nearly 2 out of 3 people in this survey said that they struggle to find time and energy to do their actual job, right? So we have home or personal life pressures, we have work pressures, and then on top of work pressures, there's this other kind of slew of things that we're doing that keep us from approaching both or in a right way.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody at a conference last week, and I was kind of joking about the breakdown of my day. And I was saying that 75% of my day is in Zoom calls. Another 75% of my day is just trying to stay on top of email and getting back to people. And then another 75% of my day is doing my actual job. And I'm not a mathematician, but it just feels like my day is really, it's pretty full with a lot of these things. And it does feel like it's been exacerbated a little bit with the advent of video conferences. It feels like they're just so easy to set up now. And the amount of time that we actually give people to slow things down a little bit it's hard, because I think time is at a premium. Most of us are time poor, and this is part of where the stressors come from, is the fact that we're just trying to juggle our time, and we're still trying to make a meaningful impact for the organizations that we work for. And I think part of the challenge is time. I think when you're feeling time pressure, stress levels go up, and it's harder to feel relaxed or in the moment or present when you're just jumping from one meeting to the next, and then you just got to get to these emails that your client is saying is urgent, or those kind of things. And it starts to add up, and it becomes a really emotionally taxing day at the end of the day.
And that it does. And I think that's why it's important for us as people who work in the workplace, as well as companies, to be able to acknowledge that these things are happening, and how do we react to it, and how do we make it into a place that could help us alleviate the stress as well as gain the stress, I guess, right? Because I guess there is a good in work and in stress and pushing ourselves, in that's how we grow as humans. But then there is a kind of thing about doing it too much where that'll actually break us, right? Like the analogy of like building muscle, and by working out is literally by breaking muscle just so it can re-heal itself in a stronger way. So it gets crazy though, like when it shows up in the workplace in different ways, when we're not allowed to do that, right? Like I think in another like episode, I remember you were talking about how you were in a meeting and someone was just like saying something that you weren't sure about, but you were like questioning, like, is this the right place? Is this safe enough for me to ask? Like, wait a minute, what's going on? What are you talking about? Or what I heard you say is, right? I think it's like little things like that, like mini anxieties that could affect you over time, right? And sometimes we need that like release valve, right? Of like, how can I say this and get it off my chest and make sure I feel better? Because when little things like that happen, you carry it with you. And so that like that baggage just becomes heavier and heavier until you find a way to release it.
I couldn't agree more. Just shifting gears a little bit, Pinaki, I was just thinking about the role that HR policy plays in, helping us have time carved out for personal things. So we have personal days as a version of PTO or bereavement leave. And it occurs to me that not every people manager or leader understands the role that the policy can play. I think some people, the instinct is just be really draconian about it, saying, you know what, Pinaki, I know your dog died, but it's been 3 days now, and that's our policy. Like, you really need to come back into the office now and start doing your work and be productive again. And I don't know about you. I'm a dog owner. I think for non-dog owners, it sounds like it's a relatively trivial thing. It's like, come on, it's just a dog. But I think for people who have dogs, it is just as traumatic of an emotional event as losing a family member. And it is something that can be really stressful for families. And sometimes it does take some time to heal. And I think when we as people leaders or managers are too strict about application of policy and not really understanding that it's going to be different and hits different for everybody depending on what the circumstances or what it is that they're going through, and to just automatically and robotically say everyone gets 3 days and that's the maximum, and then after that you must come back into the office, and don't forget you have to be in the office minimum 3 days a week. That's our new policy. And I think it's kind of missing the point, which is policy, I think, can be there to serve as almost like a guideline, but it still requires people to be able to exercise empathy and understand, you know what, I know how much that dog meant to Pinaki, and I 3 days is not going to be enough. We can bring him back, but it's not going to help him, and it's not going to help our organization because he's not going to be as productive or as useful. So I think people managers need enough of that flexibility to understand how to apply policy as a guideline. And I think where it comes out of, unfortunately, is I always get this sense, and maybe you might think I'm wrong about this, but I feel like policy sometimes is in place as a way to prevent abuse. And for me, it almost feels like it's there with the assumption that we can't trust our people. They're going to just take advantage or abuse this if we give them, for example, unlimited PTO. When we've seen that this is something that has been introduced, but I think trust is such a valuable currency for employers and their employees. And when employees feel trusted, I think they're capable of doing a lot more. And so I think it's just the point I'm trying to make is more, what is the role of policy, right? And how should people leaders use policy to the benefit of not only the people that work for you, but also for the organization?
I do agree with you. I don't think HR was originally created for the benefit of the worker or the person, as opposed to protecting the organization, which is where really I think the conflict in HR kind of comes out. And it's like we're trying to balance the needs of both, and like it's difficult. How do we get what we want from our employees, but at the same time give our employees what they need to do the right thing, and then kind of guard against like people abusing the system, and that's in itself a whole interesting topic because if you hire people who you don't trust, then there's something about your hiring practices that we need to look at, right? And in your final point, right, about like managers and how they like react or work with policies is a hugely important role. I ran across, and maybe we could like add a link to this as well. But like Reworked has a great resource. It's called the Manager's Guide to Mental Health Literacy, and it'll help managers, look at the perspective from like, go from like this maturity model of like, I don't care, that's your problem, to holy wow, we're going to support you through this. And it gives like wonderful resources and ways to think about how managers could react to people when they're going through some health issues, because it is true. It's not HR that's going to be the ones that like save the day or help you. I think it's more or less the managers and the relationship managers. And I think I'll give a shout out to the more modern HR practices that are out there that are actually, fighting the good cause and like working these new avenues to really care for employees. So I don't want you all to feel like you're doing something wrong out there. I think it's just the kind of the older guard of HR practices that we need to be careful of. And, with kind of like the way we kind of approach this, it's also like, again, kind of like that balance between like both sides of the coin here, right? And I think the first thing that I think we acknowledge is like the issue, right? Like if you are working too much, if you do have like mental health issues or a condition that you're working through, and how it affects the workplace, right? Like I do know folks who I've been mentoring, who's like employees who've had to take time off suddenly because of a mental health issue. I have had employees who have had to do that, right? And that could create a strain on the business. So I definitely get it, right? If like tomorrow one of our employees says that, I have to just go for like a week, we have to react to that, and people in the company have to react to that because, things just can't drop, right? So I get it that it's easier for a manager to say, just leave that at home and don't bring it into the workplace, but that's not possible, right? Because we're humans and we can't just, it's like that wild show on Apple TV. What is it? Where they split themselves when they go into the office.
Severance.
There you go. We can't sever ourselves in different ways like that. And I think even in the show, they showed like funny things happen when you do. But if you like kind of think about it and accept the people, and even like if working with someone who is a workaholic, or working with someone who has like depression or bipolar or ADHD, I think we need to embrace them, because the thought of these people are not able to contribute, I think, is a huge fallacy. I some of the people that I've worked with or know that bring this to the table bring like a huge advantage, right? And like if you think about some of even like the famous people who have certain personality disorders or substance abuse, or at least thought to have, were like great contributors of society, right? From like Abraham Lincoln, Beethoven, Andy Warhol, and even like Steve Jobs, right? You could like look at what, his personality and say, there's not completely something right there. But they're bringing that stuff into the workplace. And there is some like negativity behind them, but then there's something like really awesome that they contribute into the workplace as well.
Couldn't agree more, Pinaki. And I think the richness of organizations that are committed to neurodiversity and understanding the many gifts that, people with all kinds of different wiring can bring to the workplace, I think is really powerful. And I think that one of the things that happens a lot with HR is the people that are making hiring decisions, that are, formulating policy and, executing on policy. They tend to be neurotypical people, and they're not always potentially aware or able to sort of foresee the challenges that some people might be facing with some of the policies or the ways. So it's not, I don't think it's as simple as the number of days of PTO or bereavement leave. It's so much more layered and complex than that. But, ultimately, I think it's important for organizations to understand that as humans, we're all unique. We all have different things that we're struggling with. And it's really, really challenging and difficult to try to apply a blanket policy that is equal the same for everybody. Because the truth is, we're just different, and we all work through issues and different struggles in different ways. And it's important for organizations to recognize that and try to be as accommodating as they can, so that you can yield the best outcomes, not only for your organization, but importantly for your people.
That's so true, right? And there's something we said about like fairness is not always equal, and equal is not always fair, right? And I think that we have to take that into account, as each individual is like as a set person, right? And I think the trends, like to kind of put on some like a good news out there, right? Like managers have an important role. I think that they're learning to listen more compassionately and really working to like not play that amateur counselor role, but just really being helpful. Actually, like Yelp is actually doing like including all that stuff in their leadership training, and how do we talk to folks and whatnot. Surveys are saying too, like there's that people are more comfortable talking about mental health at work and everything like that, right? So that's a good thing right now. I think the core of it all goes into prioritizing relationships above other things, right? Like I think by doing that, you will win in the long run. by just like looking at individuals, looking at the relationship, because if the relationship is strong between manager, employee, between employee and coworkers, between employee and the company, things will move so much smoother, no matter like the circumstances that we're all fitting under here. I think so many times we choose like the short-term gain over the long-term relationships that we have, because it could be as easy as like just checking in with people or asking someone out for a coffee, spending some time with them. And if you've like watched the latest season of Ted Lasso, just perhaps watching a Super Bowl game with them, have them get the sense that they belong here no matter who they are.
Yeah, no, I love that.
So I think we're coming into closing here. I mean, I'll kind of end with a few quick things. I think the one stat that'll just kind of like help kind of formulate that thing that I just said is an 80-year-old Harvard Medical School study says that the most important attribute for a happier and healthier life is good relationships. Loneliness is harmful. Loneliness is like a bigger problem among young people. Robert Waldinger did a TED Talk about it called What Makes a Good Life? Lessons from the Longest Study in Happiness. I recommend you all to take a look at it. Any words from you, Chris, before we go into closeout here?
No, I think, I mean, this is, for a lot of organizations, it's uncharted territory. And I think it's so meaningful for organizations to understand the role that people, managers, and leaders play. And it's more than just policy or introducing new programming to support mental health. I think organizations have to be really active and also introspective in understanding what role are they playing in either being a positive impact on people's mental health, or potentially even looking really closely at, are we part of the problem? Do we have managers, or do we have a culture that is actually harming our people? And I think it's important for organizations to be candid and open about understanding themselves and what they really represent in terms of their people's mental health.
Totally. Just make it okay and make it safe. My grandmother, my wife's grandmother, we just celebrated her 95th birthday, and while I was there, yeah, right. It was wonderful to see that. While there, we gave her the mic and she said a few words. People got to have a little Q&A with her. But I asked her, what is the best advice you could give to the next generation? And her response was to not go into your little corner, right? Like, I think she said, when you're hit with a problem, talk to people and make it okay to do so, and listen to people, because you don't want to just go off in your corner and just try to bear the weight or the burden of it all by yourself, right? So that is our episode of Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work? Why does it feel so wrong to put yourself for the company? So thank you everyone for joining in. I think this episode shed some light, and I hope it opened your eyes to just a few different ways to look at different people around you, what they might be going through, and perhaps even have more empathy towards them, checking in on them, helping them out. So thank you all for joining in. If your organization or manager does a great job of prioritizing mental health, we want to hear your stories. On the flip side, if you have a workplace that is not doing it well, we want to hear from you as well. Let us know. We're on LinkedIn, TikTok. You can email us at whydoesitfeelsowrong@localwisdom.com. Thank you all for listening. I'm Pinaki Kathiari, CEO of Local Wisdom and self-diagnosed dyslexic. Joining me is my partner, Chris Lee, Vice President of Communications at Gallagher and self-diagnosed ADHD. Yeah, we got issues, but so does everyone else. Shout out to Local Wisdom. At Local Wisdom, the team regularly checks in on each other's mental health. They have a safe culture. They get to speak with sincerity. We use a product called Resource Hero, which is our own forecasting app to help us know when people are overworked. So when working with Local Wisdom, you know you're working with unicorns who are cared for and protected. So call them up. localwisdom.com. Make sure you follow us. See ya.
See you soon.